Welcome to Extracurricular. I'm your co-host, Eddie Geller.
And I'm your other co-host, Stephanie Vanos, Orange County School Board member for District 6, here today, as I am always, completely unofficially.
Where everything clicks.
That was quite the tagline right there.
Thank you very much.
Succinct and catchy.
I came up with it myself. Okay, welcome to the podcast. We are called Extracurricular. For a short amount of time, we're called TBD. Do you remember those days, Steph?
I do.
It was maybe about a month or two. I don't know. And then we were like, we're geniuses. And we came up with the name for this podcast that existed for another podcast. But I feel like we're the real Extracurricular podcast at this point. Would you agree?
I completely agree.
Thank you. You're just like going along with whatever I'm saying.
Whatever you say, I agree.
All right. Perfect. Okay. You're going to run for governor.
Disagree.
Okay. If you are new to Extracurricular, please do consider subscribing, following us on Instagram, extracurricular_podcast. You can also email us, podcast@extracurricular@gmail.com, and also rating this podcast. Steph, can you give them maybe a suggestion of what they could rate us?
5 stars only.
5 stars only. Thank you so much. Want to start off with a quick programming note. There will be no show next week, not because we're sick of doing this podcast, quite the opposite, but you and I are going to go to a wedding in Los Angeles. Are you excited?
We are. I'm excited. Trips to California are fun.
My dear friends, Jory and Natalia, are getting married. Shouts to them. I don't know that they listen to this podcast, but they should. I mean, if they're friends of mine, shouldn't they be listening to this podcast?
We're going to their wedding in Los Angeles.
The least they could do is listen to the podcast. If you know Jory or Natalia, please tell them they should listen to the podcast and also congratulate them on getting married because it's a wonderful thing. But we'll be in Los Angeles. We're not really going to have the bandwidth to do a podcast, but we will be back the following week. Okay. Steph just dropped something from the table. I don't know what it was, but I think we're going to be all right. Might have been her phone. Okay. Steph, we had another great interview. We are just like, we're unstoppable with these great interviews. Who did we have on the podcast this week?
We had Dr. Mara Schiff. She was a former school board member in Indian River County. I met her at that time and just immediately loved her style. She is brainy, she is witty, she is thoughtful, and she was just so fabulous to talk with today. We talked about a little bit about her experience on the school board, but we also talked a lot about her area of expertise, which is in restorative justice. That
is absolutely correct. Now, I allude to this a little bit in the interview, but this kind of came from a conversation or many conversations you and I have been having about discipline at OCPS, because we've talked a lot of the podcast, and I think generally communication about what OCPS is doing and the successes that they are having have to do with A and B schools and the new schools that are being created. And you know, we had Brady and Hope, 2 high performers on the podcast, but I think it is also worthwhile thinking about this, how we deal with students who are going through troubles and who are not having the easiest time, and how do schools and administrations and us as a society deal with students who are having problems, both who caused those problems and who are the victims, if you will say, of harms, and how restorative justice addresses those sorts of things. So I know that was a mouthful. What do you think of that, Steph?
No, I think that's true. And I really loved how she talks about the relational piece of addressing harm and holding students accountable and really people accountable. I mean, restorative justice is not something that's just limited to schools, but it's really can be used in many different circumstances. And so, yeah, I thought what she said was really interesting. And I think it is important that we need to look at all of the different parts that make the school system move forward and some of the concerns that people have as well.
So yeah, if you have not heard of restorative justice, or maybe you know a little bit about it, this is really a great interview, and hope folks, take some interesting things away and maybe even do a little bit more research. We talk a little bit at the end about where people can find out more, but I love this conversation. I thought it's a really important conversation to have. So we're not just knee-jerk sort of doing things the way we've always been done in terms of discipline, but really thinking about what is best for students and the community and the schools, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it is something that I know OCPS does participate in right now, and I know other school districts do as well, but it's not always something that we hear about. And so it was really great to get Mara's take. She gives some specific examples of how it can be used in schools, which I think is really helpful too. So I love this conversation, and I love talking with Mara.
How else was our week? What else did we do this week, Steph?
Well, you won a beer league championship.
Oh my gosh, that is right. My hockey team, the Thunder, we are the beer league champions. We won from 4 teams. Maybe one of the greatest moments of my life. I don't know. Still figuring that out. I've never been married. I don't have any children. So, and I lost my congressional race. So maybe the competition there is not as high, but it was really fun. And I was glad to be on the ice with those guys. I really liked them. Were you at the game, Steph?
I was up there real high up in the seats. You may not have seen me. Those are some late games.
The game was at 9:30. And sometimes we have those games at 11:30. It's really late. But anyway, we won the championship, and now I feel like a new person.
Look at you.
A champion. And no, Kash Patel did not come into our locker room after the game. There was no call to President Trump, no ill-advised, disgusting jokes about women's hockey or the women's hockey team. So proud of the victory. And, now you're podcasting with a championship. So that must feel pretty great.
It feels fantastic. It feels great.
But you know what else we did, which was maybe a little more nourishing, is we actually went to an event this week, the Democracy Society here in Orange County, with our friend, former guest of the podcast, Congressman Maxwell Frost. How was that event for you?
Oh, it was great. I think it was, it was a good conversation about sort of where we are and what's happening at the federal level and, just how important it is to stay engaged and to, think about how important, our local elections are as well.
It was really, it's always great to see Congressman Frost speak. He's so smart and so engaged and a great speaker, and shouted you out specifically and gave a mention to our podcast, not by name. He did not say extracurricular, but he did mention Stephanie Vanos's show. So you're kind of famous. How does that feel?
Well, I am only a co-host. I would just say that. So, but it was very sweet.
But in a room of political folks in Orange County, it is the Stephanie Vanos show with Guy.
It is not.
Okay. Well, we'll see about that. Anything else on your mind?
No, I think let's get to the conversation.
Let's get to our conversation with Dr. Mara Schiff. Here we go.
Dr. Mara Schiff, it is such an honor to have you on this episode talking to us. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Stephanie. It's an honor to be here with you both.
Well, we have so much to learn today, and so I'm looking forward to digging in. But first, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. As you know, I served on school board, but prior to that, which I'll get to, I have a PhD in public administration from New York University. I've spent 30 years as a professor at Florida Atlantic University, first as in the School of Public Administration, and then in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, where I've been housed for something like 25 years. I've been a restorative justice scholar and practitioner for about 30 years, and I specifically focus on youth and the intersection of justice and education systems. And as you know, as I alluded to earlier, I ran for and was elected to the school board of Indian River County from 2018 to 2022.
Well, I want to get into what you study, but it's hard to pass up you being on the school board from 2018 to 2022, because what a 4-year term that was.
Indeed.
What can you tell us about? So let's just start there. What can you tell us about your time on the school board?
Sure. When I wasn't ever really planning to run. And then 2017 hit a rough moment in politics, 2016, 2017. And I started to really think about that saying, all politics is local. And so I heard a speaker at a particular event who was saying that if you want to make a difference, the thing to do is run for office. And I had never contemplated that. And this particular speaker started with run for governor. And I thought, oh, I can't possibly do that. And then he said, run for Congress. And I thought, in the back of my head, I can't possibly do that. And he went all the way down the list, run for state rep, run for county commission, run for city council, run for mayor. And he got through all of those while the little voice in my head said, oh, God, no, I'd never do that. Gets to the very end of the list and he says, and if you can't do any of those, run for school board. And I thought, oh, crap. I could do that. So I sat on it for a year. I talked to people. And then in the beginning of 2018, I saw all of these women standing up to run for office. It was a moment when women were being somewhere between invited and demanded to engage. And I saw these women stepping up and I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And not only can I do it, but this is in my lane, this is in my capacity, and it's my responsibility. So I went to the supervisor of elections and I registered, and the rest is history.
Well, I'm so glad you did. I know you brought so much to the school board just because of all of your experiences. And I'm curious, did you bring a lot of did you bring a lot of the restorative justice sort of pieces? Were you able to integrate that into the Indian River, public school system, or sort of how did you find that to be?
So as you know, serving on school boards is complicated.
Yes.
And it's very different from what it looks like when you're campaigning and you're sitting on the other side of the dais and you think you know what the job is. So when I ran, it was much tougher than I expected. So first there was some nasty infighting going on between some of the existing members. So the first night that I was sworn in, I had to make a political alignment about who I'd vote for as chair. And that was going to dictate who my, alliances were moving forward. So the first order of business, so first I had to do that, which crafted a bit of the environment right then. Mm-hmm. The first thing that we had to do was not renew the contract of the current superintendent at that time. And as you know, as a school board member, that is the most significant thing a school board does, is hires, fires, and works with the superintendent. And we were deciding not to renew that current superintendent. So that was tough. And that took the first 6 months, maybe. And then we had to decide whether to hire a permanent or an interim while we were getting our feet wet in this job. There were 3 of us who were elected that year, and we were all new. So we hired an interim who was terrific while we then, so we let her get everything kind of settled down. And then we moved into the process of hiring a permanent, which we did. And we made an absolutely fantastic choice that I can't speak highly enough of. Dr. David Moore, who's the current sitting superintendent of Indian River County, shout out, and who has raised the profile of Indian River County schools astronomically, which is what we hired him to do. But 44 days after he was hired, COVID hit. Ugh. So we get through this very tough year of superintendent. We had 3 superintendents in a year. And then COVID hits. And then, so there's all that. And then the outgrowth of that was the parental rights movement and Moms for Liberty, which was started by somebody who I served with in office for 2 years. And ground zero was Indian River County and Brevard counties. So I will say something here that may be unpopular, maybe not with your audience, but generally. There I was in this very tough political moment where I was the outsider who was known and perceived to be the Democratic, liberal, progressive, communist, Marxist, yada, yada, every name they could throw at me. I was that in the middle of this very tense political fight. So it was hard. Yeah. It was it was one of the hardest jobs I've ever had, if not the hardest job I've ever had in my life. I've now completely forgotten your question. I think there was something else.
No, well, it sounds like you ended up spending those 4 years almost just navigating crisis after crisis rather than, 100%. Trying to bring, maybe something that you really cared about or a priority for you that you thought maybe was a priority before you got elected into the office.
That's a really accurate way of putting it. I thought, and I ran on a platform of of improving school safety and how we responded to school safety. From my background as a restorative justice practitioner and scholar, what I knew, and we'll get into this a little more later, what I knew is that zero tolerance policies and punishment doesn't really work. It's politically salient, but it's not particularly effective for schools and for kids and for families. So I thought I'd be able to integrate more of that. I thought I'd be able, and to some degree, I was able to bring a perspective that I'd learned from all of that work. What I didn't know was A, crisis to crisis to crisis, COVID, parental rights, parental rights. But also, what I didn't understand was how much of the school board member role is not about actually digging in and doing the work. So the degree to which I love doing direct policy work, I love engaging in sort of deep thought and analytic work about policy making and about leadership and all of that. It's not really what you do as a school board member. And I didn't know that. What you do as a school board member is support your superintendent. You are a voice of your constituency and the public. You are a sounding board for the constituency and the public. And in many ways, you serve a largely symbolic role. So I thought I'd be able to accomplish much more than I feel like I actually did. In part because I didn't understand the role, and in part because as I came to understand it, it was later in my term, and we were dealing with so much happening all the time that I don't think I was as effective as I could have been in ways that I could have influenced policy. And I wish I had, that's a regret, actually. I wish I had done more of that.
Well, one thing I was thinking about before this interview is you made a decision to not run for a second term. And I don't know, does part of, like, hearing you talk about what your regret was, is there part of you that thought like, oh, if I ran for a second term, I could have made more of these things happen? Can you talk about that decision?
Sure. Very good question. Yes, because I knew I'd be so much more effective in a second term. I knew that I had learned the ropes, and that things I had either been afraid to do or challenged to do or too crisis driven to do, I could do in a second term. But here was the hit. There were two hitches, two significant hitches. One, the environment had become so toxic that not only was it affecting me physically. I mean, I'd come home after school board meetings with splitting headaches and stomach cramp, all of this, because it was so hard. Three things, actually, I might have said two. Second, what became clear is that it was so much more about political alignment than it was actually good policy. And that's just like when I ran for school board, naively, I had no idea how political the job was. And it wasn't in 2017, 2018. It became so much more political in 2018 and after, and 2020 and after COVID. But I naively assumed it was actually about doing the job, and it was actually about the best interest of education. And by 2022, when I would have run again, it was mostly about alignment and holding a majority, whatever that looked like. So that didn't feel great to me, the toxicity of it. But mostly, that I could have lived with and I could have navigated. More significantly, I had applied as a U.S. Fulbright scholar to Belgium. And I knew that if I won that award, I wasn't turning it down. And it was, something I'd been looking forward to for 20 years of my academic career while I was raising a child and couldn't leave the country. And in honesty, I thought there was a pretty good shot I'd get it. And if I did get it, it was going to take me out of the country from September 2023 to June 2024. And that wasn't fair. For me to run for office and then have to step down a year later wasn't fair to anybody who had elected me, wasn't fair to the current school board, and would then result in a gubernatorial appointment to replace me. And that just wasn't fair.
Yeah.
So I had to step away because I knew the Fulbright opportunity wasn't going to come around again. and I had to go with that. So that's mostly why I didn't do it. Yeah.
And I just have to ask, did you get that Fulbright opportunity?
I did. I was awarded the Fulbright Scholar Grant, and I lived in Leuven, Belgium for 10 months and was affiliated with a university over there doing restorative work. It was all about doing restorative justice work in a European restorative justice hub and capital. So, or capital of restorative justice work, not capital city. So that was something I'd looked forward to for so many years that I had to do it. So yes, I did. Another huge learning experience.
Well, we'll jump into restorative justice in just a moment, but one last question. Do you think you'd ever run for something again?
Plead the fifth.
Sorry, go for it.
Well, here's the thing. Like I think about it, you know, and then I remind myself. I think because here's the thing, you know, serving on school board was among the most difficult, but also the most transformative experiences I've ever had in my life. And so you can't hide out in that job, and you got to have thick skin. Most importantly, you got to own your own self. You got to be really clear on your values, your beliefs, what you stand for, what you're willing to fight for, and which hill you're willing to die on. And I've never been in a position where I had to do that so publicly and so loudly and deal with whatever were the after effects the next day or the next week in local papers, in social media, among the people who, shall we say, considerably disliked me and disliked my approach. So after my term was up, people would say to me, "Did you like serving in school board?" And I'd say, "That's the wrong question. The question isn't whether I liked it. The right question is, was it worth it? Did you learn? Did you grow? Did I like it? No, not especially. It was hard. It was painful. But did I grow exponentially? Did I learn about myself? Did I evolve into a different, stronger, more competent, more confident person? Absolutely. It is absolutely one of the things I am most proud of ever having done in my life. So, would I do it again? I don't know. School board, it's tricky. School board, we would have to evolve beyond this moment when school board is more about politics than policy. And when it is more about doing the right thing consistently for kids and how we do that without worrying about the political pathway that we tread and navigate. Because I don't know that I'm cut out for that. That's not my strength. It's not my purpose. It's not the thing that makes me feel most competent in the job, frankly. Not that great at that part.
Well, I mean, so well said. And I feel a lot of that. But I also think, you know, as I know you're an associate professor, I have to think that the job you're in now involves some of the same things. Does it?
It does, but it's far more recent. It was not always like this. It has become that in the last some number of years. But it wasn't always like that. The way I have to navigate my academic environment now is very different than I have ever done it. Was very different than before I left for Europe and then went on. So I was in Europe for a year and then I had sabbatical for a year. So I was gone from academia for 2 years. And when I came back, the environment is much more tense, is fraught with different kinds of conflict, and is fraught with a political overtone or undertone, whichever, that I have to navigate very differently than I have done for the last 30 odd years of my academic career. So yes, but it's different, and it's not as public, and it's not as, I'm not going to wind up in the paper the next day for what I say in a classroom. Yeah. There are ways in which that could work its way up to higher levels of academic administration and wind up in the paper, but it's a very different environment than school board. Yeah. It's much more sheltered. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Well, since we're kind of moving in that direction, I'm wondering, can you give our listeners sort of a basic definition of what is restorative justice?
Sure. So the most basic, 30-second elevator speech about restorative justice is that it shifts the intent and focus of the justice process from being all about trailing, nailing, and jailing, basically people who have done harm, to including individuals and communities who have experienced harm and voicing what happened, its impact, who's responsible, and what needs to be done to repair the harm or to make it right. That's it. It's actually quite simple. It refocuses how we conceive of justice to be more inclusive, more tolerant, and more sensitive to the lives of people who have been involved in these life-altering events.
That's a great definition. And one of the things, and I think one of the reasons that we're having this conversation is Steph and I have had a number of conversations based on her involvement in and conversations with the discipline folks here at OCPS, and what does justice and restorative justice look like on a school board level, on a school level. So can you talk about how restorative justice intersects with our education system?
The thing about restorative justice is that it is first and foremost relational. It is about reparation and accountability, not necessarily punishment. And while it holds those who have done harm accountable for the harm they've caused, it doesn't view the best way to impose justice or discipline as punishment, but rather is understanding the impacts of actions on others and being responsible for one's own behavior and repairing the harm caused. So to follow up, how can schools implement restorative justice, which I think you were also asking me to reflect on. There's kind of two ways to think about that. One is as a discipline response to address specific harm and conflict when it happens. I'll get more into these in a second. The second is as what's called a whole school culture and climate initiative, focused on relationships and values, and then responding to harm. So what works best is when those two things are done in tandem. And what I mean by that is when you use a non-punitive, restorative discipline strategy based in accountability and relationality, in an otherwise punitive and toxic environment, it has really limited effectiveness. Because, come on, kids are smart. They can see right through, right? They can see right through when you're being hypocritical because it's either not the culture and tenor of the school or because you're asking them to do something that the adults don't practice and the adults don't do either. And they know that. So asking them, for example, to sit in a restorative circle when they already know what the outcome is going to be, and they know that they don't really have a voice in that, is going to have limited effectiveness. It's also going to have limited effectiveness when it's inconsistent with the values of the school. It doesn't mean it can't work, and it doesn't mean it's not effective, and it doesn't mean it won't produce positive outcomes for the people involved. But it means that it doesn't sit inside an overall culture and climate of a particular set of values and relationships and connections and how the school actually operates. So as a whole school approach, what happens is schools will incorporate a set of restorative values into everything that they do, into their policies, their procedures, both formal and informal, into how we treat each other. And those values might include things like respect, accountability, compassion, tolerance, empathy, repairing harm, flexibility, creativity, all of these things, all of which research says is actually effective. Because I want to emphasize here as an academic and as a researcher that what matters is not it matters what we think about it. But what also matters is what does research say about it? Mm-hmm. Does empirical research say that this works or it doesn't? And let's go with that rather than often simply our knee-jerk responses inside what sounds good or what we think is good or what intuitively feels good or what is politically salient, any of that. So research says I'm not gonna cite it all here, but trust me, I have receipts. That research suggests it's really effective for building relationships. It's really effective for strengthening culture and climate, for decreasing harsh exclusionary discipline, for minimizing racial disproportionality in school discipline, for improving individual and collective mental and physical health and well-being, for alleviating the impacts of structural harm, such as institutional racism, marginalization of certain populations, poverty, linguistic disadvantage, food insecurity, all of these things that are brought into the school environment and may result in the kinds of things that we see as discipline issues. So I've been doing this for 30 years. I can talk about it a lot.
I bet. Well, I was wondering if you could maybe give us a concrete example for our listeners of a student does X. This is something they might normally be expelled or suspended versus what is a restorative justice pathway, what that could look like.
Sure. Oh gosh. So I'm going to give you I'll give you a hypothetical example, and then maybe I'll give you some real actual ones,
Perfect.
circles that I've sat in. So let's talk about bullying, right? Bullying is a huge issue. We invoke things like zero tolerance for bullying, right? What we know is that doesn't actually stop the bullying, right? In a restorative response, when we sit people down and we include in who's sitting together in, say, a restorative circle or a restorative dialogue of some kind, when we sit together, students who have done harm, students who have been harmed, other students who might have been affected by what happened, teachers, administrators, all of whom are affected by this, and we actually talk about what's happening for those students, we learn a lot. We learn, for example, that the child who bullied today was the child who was victimized yesterday. What we learn is that what's happening at home is causing certain things in the school environment that nobody's paying attention to and nobody's addressing, and the student doesn't know how to navigate that. What we find is that when we sit and have conversations, often students have more in common than that which separates them. And what we find is that we can collectively craft solutions that run the gamut of anywhere from these kids actually find connection to they just agree. They agree they're going to avoid each other in the halls. They're not going to talk to each other. They're not going to spread rumors in their friend groups. And there's room for any of this, none of which is satisfied by simply tossing a kid out of a classroom and out of a school, and none of which, all of which has the potential to change future behavior in a way simply tossing someone in or out of school. You still call it pass in Indian River County, Orange County.
Yep.
Tossing someone out of their seat doesn't ever really resolve. It mostly has people feel angry. It has them feel hurt. It has them feel excluded. It has them feel marginalized, all of those things which don't prevent future negative behavior. So that was a longer-winded answer than I meant.
No,
I love the amount of wind you're bringing.
I love that. And it sounds like really key to these restorative justice practices is that the students are actually involved in the whole process.
Yes.
So for example, having two students agree, even if the agreement is, listen, we're just going to avoid each other. We're not going to talk. We're just going to be on our own. That's different, I think. And I'd love to hear you speak to it than an administrator saying, not having the conversation, administrator saying you two are prohibited from, contacting each other at all. Can you talk a little bit about that ownership piece?
Absolutely. Yeah. So exactly what you said is the difference between punishment and accountability. And I would say that restorative justice focuses on accountability, not necessarily punishment. So punishment is when a teacher or administrator does something to you, decides the outcome without a youth having a voice in what happened and what that felt like and how they might hold themselves accountable for what happened and how to move forward. Accountability is owning your own behavior. Accountability is acknowledging that you did harm, taking responsibility for that, and then deciding how to repair it and move forward into the future. Those are two very different approaches. I'll give you two examples of things that have really stuck with me for many, many years that happened in middle school circles. One of them was, and I actually use this as an example sometimes when I'm training or when I'm teaching, when we do role plays. So there was, this one I don't use. I'll tell you about the second one that I use a lot. In one of them, there was a circle where two girl groups had gotten into conflict with each other, and it had escalated to the point where it was permeating the culture of the whole school, where things were happening. And so the restorative practitioner in the school at that point brought people together. This circle was way too large. There were way too many people in it. And I looked at it completely expecting it to fail because there were just too many voices in the room, and it lost its intimacy, which is really very much at the heart of how and why this works. But we get through the whole thing, and the girls are talking about what's happened, and I think it was about a boy, and it was, somebody dated somebody's boyfriend. I don't know what this was years ago. I don't fully remember. But we get towards the end of the circle when all of this has been talked about and people have voiced what this felt like and what it feels like to be in school and what it feels like to be near each other. And we're getting to the end of the circle, and the girl who was harmed goes to a necklace she's wearing. And she looks at the girl who did harm, whose name I don't remember. And she looks at her and she says, we used to be best friends, and you gave me this necklace in 4th grade. And I want you to know that I still wear it, and I wear it all the time. And I remember how close we used to be, and I've never forgotten that. You can't make this up. There's not a dry eye. You can't cause something, that kind of relationality to happen because you tell two kids not to talk to each other. I'll give you another example. There was an event where it was on a school bus, and there were two boys sitting in the seat, and they used to, joke around, and they were good friends. And there was a boy sitting in the seat behind them. And the two boys in the seat were telling yo mama jokes. And they I don't know if that still exists. This was a long time ago. I don't know if they still do this. But at the time, it was a thing. And they're, yo mama this, yo mama that. And the kid in the back keeps trying to get into the conversation. And he can't, he's not breaking in. He just wants to relate with these kids. And he says something, I don't remember exactly what he says, but, yo mama so something. And it hits a raw nerve with one of the kids in the front. And as they're getting off the school board, they drop packs and they get ready to fight. And there's an intervention, and they don't fight, but they get called into this restorative circle. And in the restorative circle, what happens is they talk about what had been going on. And it turns out that a week or so before, one of the kids had, again, don't know if they still use this term, but one of the kids had ding-dong ditched the other kid's house. And it had really scared the family. And it had really scared particularly the grandmother, who was the guardian of this kid. So there was resentment on why they weren't letting this other kid into the conversation. Then it turns out that both kids, neither kid is living with their mother. One kid's mother has been incarcerated. Another one is drug addicted and in and out of rehab. And it turns out that they both have these really difficult relationships with their mother. That's why it hit a raw nerve for one kid, but they don't know that about each other. And then the other kid, who has been, was one of the kids in the front seat, realizes in this split second aha moment, realizes that instead of exacerbating the conflict, he could actually be a leader and diminish, decrease, devolve the conflict. Instead of getting others involved, he could actually start going around, talking to other kids and being more inclusive and taking on this leadership role. And in the end, it turns out that these kids have actually real connection. and they relate to each other, and that there is opportunity for them to build relationship in a way that would not have happened in a traditional punitive disciplinary response. Again, you can't, not only can you not make this stuff up, but you cannot understand the impact of life events, of these kids' lives that they bring into school when your response is go home, leave, we don't want you, you're out. In that, not only are you excluding them from what might be one of the most, if not the only healthy environment that some kids have. You know, let's face it, bullying is not arbitrary. It comes from somewhere, right? There's a reason it happens. But if the focus is on exclusion rather than inclusion, if the focus is on how we get rid of the problem rather than creating something new to eliminate the problem permanently rather than temporarily, we have a very different response to how we address harm and conflict in the school environment. I know that this is much easier said than done. I know it's very hard to do, and it's so frustrating for teachers who are under so much pressure all the time. So a lot of it is we kind of have to step back to move forward, right? We have to step back for a minute in our knee-jerk response that is faster and easier, right? It's like, do you want a McDonald's hamburger or do you want a Chef Ramsay hamburger? Right? You know, what do you want, and what's the most effective, and what is the most long-term solution rather than the most immediate thing we can do to push the problem away till another day?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have talked, you've described sort of what the tensions maybe that school environments experience, that, there's a problem and the problem needs to be dealt with efficiently with, fewer people involved. And, but, I would say this, for someone who's going through the discipline process, I wouldn't say it's quick, and I really wouldn't say it's efficient. I mean, it's multiple meetings, it's multiple levels, it's multiple, so I wouldn't really say that is quick either. And, it sounds like restorative justice is may take some time, but that it's just a long-term solution, potentially.
Yes. But I will also add to that what really matters is doing this well and doing it with fidelity to restorative values and principles and practices. Restorative interventions done badly can do more harm than good, and can do more harm than traditional, consistent punitive sanctions. It's incredibly important that this be done consciously and conscientiously by people who bring a particular set of skills. Not everybody is cut out for this work. Not everybody is good at it. And oftentimes, what people want to do is reduce it to a pre-scripted set of questions and answers. And I'm not an advocate of that, frankly, at all. I believe it's a much more organic process. I believe it's something you have to feel as well as do. And there are many people who are good at that. But I'll tell you, I'll walk into a training room and I will tell you within the first 15 minutes who's going to be good at it and who's going to go through the motions. Mm-hmm. I can feel it immediately. So, and to your point about traditional discipline takes a while. I think that's true when you're talking about expulsions. I'm not sure it's equally true when you're talking about in-school suspension. I could be wrong because I haven't been in a school environment for a while. For an expulsion, absolutely. For a school-based arrest, that's a whole other thing too. But the process is different and how we respond to it is different. And but I honestly, I do believe, having spent enough time with enough teachers and administrators in school environments, that it is absolutely possible, and it is absolutely what I believe most teachers and administrators want and are capable of. They just have to be given the space to do it, and to do it well and effectively. and to fail, frankly. Sometimes you screw it up, right? Sometimes that happens. You've got to have the space to fail in order to know how to do it better the next time.
You did such a great job explaining the process, why it matters, and both the short-term and long-term, positive outcomes this can produce. And one of the other things you mentioned briefly is addressing disparities in punishment. And I'd love for you to talk just for a moment about that as well.
Sure. So there's a couple of schools of thought about this. And there are some who would argue that the fundamental intent and nature of restorative interventions in schools should be about decreasing racial disproportionality. There are others who don't feel as strongly about that. And neither thing is right or wrong. What is true is that since roughly 2008-10, when the Office of Civil Rights, housed in the Federal Department of Education, started tracking racial disproportionality in discipline across multiple school districts. And what they found was that consistently, kids of color were 2 to 4 times more likely to experience disproportionate discipline, particularly in subjective offenses. So when infractions were objective, and by that I mean, that's a tricky issue. You could say that weapons and drugs, theft, fighting, et cetera, is all objective, although I could tell you stories about a butter knife being considered a weapon in school. So there's that. But there are certain things that fall in what would be considered objective disciplinary infractions. There is less disproportionality there, research shows, than in subjective offenses like disrespect, insubordination, defiance, those things that are really subject to a teacher or administrator's interpretation of what happened. And so within that, research shows pretty conclusively, and I will show you this in any district I've looked at the data or would look at the data, that in discretionary offenses, marginalized kids, particularly kids of color, particularly Black boys, are more likely to be subject to exclusionary discipline for subjective offenses than their white peers. Some districts, as a result of that, I'm diverging a little bit here from the restorative thing, I'll come back. Some districts, as a result, for example, I don't remember the year, but it was some time ago. For example, the Los Angeles Unified School District eliminated the category willful defiance from their student code of conduct because it was so disproportionate, it was so obviously disproportionate that there was almost no justification for keeping that vague a term in the student code of conduct, so they eliminated it. There are other districts that have done comparable things with very vague terms. Again, something I tried to implement in Indian River County with very limited success. That said, restorative justice has shown a marked, when implemented well and with fidelity, and I'm going to keep saying that, has shown a marked decrease in racial disproportionality and exclusionary school discipline. Reducing, for example, Oakland Unified School District reduced out-of-school suspensions by, I think, 87%, or reduced the disproportionality by 87%. I did not go back and check all my specific data and statistics before this call. But there's evidence in many large school districts that when we implement restorative justice well, because of its focus on relationality, because of its focus on actually connecting with one another, that we reduce disproportionality in school discipline. Whether that's the specific intent of the school district or not is for that district to determine. But does it occur often as an outcome? Yes, data suggests that it does.
Thank you so much for this description. It's been so informative. I'm wondering, what is the number one thing you think people get wrong when they hear the term restorative justice?
Yeah. Can I have 3?
You can have 3. You're allowed.
Okay. I think one thing people get wrong is that it's not just about responding to harm. It's actually creating an overall values-based relational culture within which harm happens. When we create that culture, our responses to harm fit and are more likely to be effective inside an overall culture that supports a restorative response. I think oftentimes restorative responses are invoked strictly in response to discipline. And I don't think that's the most effective way to do it, but it is seen as the most expedient and the most, it responds most directly to a problem that schools and school districts must deal with. Second thing that I think people get wrong is it gets seen as a soft alternative to discipline. I would say it's not soft. It actually demands that people take responsibility to be accountable for their own behavior and take action to make it right. That is often harder than simply just taking the punishment. And I think people get that wrong. Third, and we talked about this earlier, punishment and accountability are not the same thing. We tend to use those terms interchangeably, but they're not. Punishment is often externally imposed. Accountability is holding your own self responsible for your behavior and then taking action to make it right moving forward, and hopefully ultimately to change your own behavior moving forward.
Got it.
There's more, but
no, yeah.
You gave me what I took.
No, I think that's really helpful. I do think that second one you mentioned is that it's sort of seen as a softer way. It's really just, I think, more of a long-term just growth opportunity and opportunity to address harms in just a different way. So I appreciate that. And I don't know if I've said that correctly. So if you disagree with that summary, then yeah, please tell me.
Well, one question that makes me think of as we were planning for this, and that answer segues right to it, is I hate this moment that we are in for so many reasons. But one is the weaponization of this word woke. But going through this conversation, I think what we are talking about here, which I think is really powerful and wonderful, also a lot of people would characterize as woke in these in our common nomenclature. How do you respond to that? I'm sure you must have heard that at some point, many points.
Yeah. So first, can I just say, ugh.
Right. Completely.
And how tired I am of the weaponization of that term. But here's the thing. What we know in justice and education systems is that punishment doesn't actually work most of the time. If punishment actually worked, we would have the safest country in the world. We have the highest incarceration rates among, I'll say for the moment, developed nations, and yet we also have some of the highest crime rates. So exclusionary punishment, isolation, incarceration doesn't work as a deterrent in the way that people intuitively think it should or it must. Does it work sometimes? Yeah. But decades of research shows that restorative justice works at least as well as and often better than traditional sanctions. And it does that in a relational context. Second, if woke is about building relationships, holding those who have done harm accountable for their behaviors, and repairing harm directly to the person or persons harmed, sign me up, and I guess we're just going to have to own that. We're just going to have to live with it.
Great answer.
I love it. Well, I think it's been weaponized for exactly the reason, all the reasons you've described. Is it does wokeness, in maybe a very broad definition, does ask us to take responsibility and to be thoughtful about long-term consequences and to adjust racial disparities, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of people in this country who want no part of that. So, take that what you will. All right. One other thing we'll finish up talking about schools and elsewhere. But one thing I couldn't help but thinking about, because I've been thinking a lot about it these days, our current administration, the amount of law breaking that is happening at the highest levels, whether it be corruption or abuse of the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. As we move into whatever the next phase, God willing, of governance in this country, is there a place for restorative justice among some of the highest crimes that can take place in this country?
I'm going to have to say yes. But I'm going to say yes with a caveat.
Please.
And here's the thing. Restorative justice cannot and should never be used coercively. It has to be a voluntary process between people who have chosen to come together to talk about what happened, the impact of that, and the harm that occurred, and what needs to be done to make it right. The caveat is I cannot guarantee or assume that the people to whom you might be referring are ever willing to have that voluntary conversation. If they were in a place willing to have a voluntary conversation, and I'll allude to what you may be thinking of as a something like Truth and Reconciliation, right? In South Africa or in Rwanda, or actually in this country, it's happened as well as in Canada. To have an effective truth and reconciliation, there has to be willingness on the sides of both parties.
Dr. Schiff, I've heard you say that restorative justice involves a voluntary process of people coming together and being willing to sort of work through the harms that were caused. And I'm wondering what you think the future of restorative justice is, both in schools and society, and sort of what factors influence that.
So, Stephanie, I'll tell you about something that I've been working on and thinking a lot about lately. As an academic, I'm responsible for writing academic papers and thinking deeply about things. And I've been working with a colleague on where restorative justice works and where it doesn't, and where I think it is evolving beyond its capacity and where I think its strength lays. And what I think is the primary strength of restorative justice is in its intimacy, is when it brings people together to talk about very difficult and often painful things in a safe, well-facilitated, constructive environment where people have voluntarily selected to come together to talk about these issues and to move towards resolution. When that happens, I will say I have seen magic occur. However, and this is where I admit to being, in spite of my advocacy for restorative justice, I am also a cynic, because I think often when we move processes that are at their best relational and intimate and require empathy and vulnerability, when we move those into institutional settings that are somewhere between the opposite of that at worst, or at best simply don't inspire those kinds of connections and don't make room for them, I think we have the potential to do harm rather than good. We often want to take restorative because it works, because we know it works in these intimate moments. We often want to take that and expand it. It's like, we found this great thing and we want everybody to have a piece of it and we want everybody to know about this and we want to do it all the time. And in that process of escalation, what often happens is we lose its essence and we turn it into something administrative. We turn it into something rote. We turn it into something standardized and scripted and mundane. And it is easy to do that in institutional settings like schools or carceral settings like jails and prisons, where, by the way, and we haven't talked about this, a lot of these kids will wind up if we do not stem the tide of both disproportionality and systematic exclusionary school discipline. But when we institutionalize a process that was never designed to be institutionalized, and we lose the essence of what that process needs, which is to bring people together in safe, voluntary, compassionate, empathetic moments. I have seen it often happen in school settings where we complain that it doesn't work, or we complain that it's not reducing school discipline or whatever it's supposed to do. And the problem is because we're not doing it right. The problem is because we are forcing it into a box that the institution requires. And we have to learn how to navigate that, and to navigate that often better than we do. There are places where it works and where it works well. But if we do not navigate that carefully, we are going to wind up doing something that we are calling restorative justice, which is anything but. And then we're going to complain that it doesn't work, or we're going to use it as an example of why this stuff doesn't work, when in fact, it isn't what we've done at all. So, does that answer your question?
No, that does. It sounds like the future is, there's so much potential, but it has to be, if it's not done right, that it's hard. The reality is it's hard to operate in an institutional setting. That's what I hear.
Well, and institutions, as you well know, have a life of their own, right? It is very hard to change the course of a ship. I worked with someone a long time ago who used this term trim tabs, right? That I'm not a sailor, but that thing on the boat where you just very slightly shift direction. I may be saying this all wrong. If there are any sailors listening, I apologize. But schools and school districts are very difficult ships to navigate and to change direction. We are in a moment also that is calling for that direction to shift in ways that don't necessarily inspire greater relationality, greater emotional competence, greater vulnerability, greater sort of expansion of our competence and capability. Because I will say that the challenge about schools, too, is that ostensibly, and this is, I think, a debate that's currently happening, is yes, schools are about academics, right? I'm an academic, of course. They're about academic subjects. They're about teaching kids to read and to write and to do math and to do chemistry and all of these things. But that's not only what they're about. What they are also about is educating citizens. What they are about is creating good citizens and creating young people who know how to relate to others, who know how to feel empathy for others in circumstances not their own, for creating people who will civically engage as adults in responsible ways. And we miss that when we don't build those skills alongside the academic skills that we tend to think of schools being all about. They're not. And in many other countries, these things are built simultaneously in ways that we don't talk often about or don't talk well about in this country, I would say.
Well, that last part, I feel like you could not have said that better, and I could not agree with you more. And I'm sorry to say, I think we need to see you on a school board again. So you just bring so much wisdom and thoughtfulness, and I think just really getting what K-12 education, I think, should really be about. It's about so much. And so that's just so well said. I'm not even going to attempt to rephrase that. So thank you.
Can I pop in one last quick question, which we didn't prepare for, but I'm sure you'll be able to answer. If folks want to learn more about restorative justice, what resources can they go to?
Well, it would be better for me to probably send you resources outside of this moment, live on the podcast, and I'll send you some links to those. I do want to give a plug and a shout out to something called the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice, who is having their 10th annual conference this summer in New Orleans from July 7th to 10th. At that conference, easily 60% of the attendees come from school-based environments and are talking about implementing restorative practices in schools. So if people have the time, the resources, and the interests, I highly recommend going to the NACRJ website and learning more about that conference. The overall schedule is not published yet, but it is specifically put in the summer so that school-based people can go. But I've been a part of that organization for on and off 15 years now. And I will be at that conference. So highly recommend, if you want to learn more very direct hands-on from people who do this work in places where it occurs successfully, that's a good place to look.
That's great. Steph, can we send you?
Maybe. I know I'd be interested to learn more for sure. But thank you so much for sharing that and for just, again, all of your expertise and all of the research that you've done and how you talk about this with people and how you talk about as it relates to schools. I think it's been really helpful. And I think it's something that I think we need to think about how we incorporate this more into really everything we do. So thank you, Mara, for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate you. Thank you for your service to Indian River School Board and also to your community and just society at large. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
This is great.